Well, good morning and welcome to day 3 of Kaiju Masterclass 2. I'm Steve Ryfle, and we're very pleased to have this very special interview session with Chris Mowry. Chris is someone who got his start in the video game industry working for Midway Games and Sega of America. And then he was at IDW Publishing, and during his time there, he served as the company's creative consultant on all their Godzilla titles. He worked with the editorial team to publish more than 85 titles, and he was the writer of the longest running Godzilla comic series ever. Then that is IDW's Godzilla Rulers of Earth, as well as other titles. He's a veteran of the U.S. Navy, and currently he serves as Toho International's creative manager in Los Angeles. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Steve.
So we're really excited to be talking to you both about your work in Godzilla comics and your work for Toho. And we're also super excited to have as my co-interviewer today, who really will be driving the boat, Keith Foster. Keith is the head of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Keith, the head of 215 Ink Press, which publishes Keith's own original giant monster comic, Kadoja. He's been a podcaster. He's a musician. He plays excellent heavy metal guitar. He's a rapper. He's produced albums. He's produced soundtrack records for his books, including Kadoja. His band, Big Pimp Jones, records albums. They've performed at events, including Godzilla events. He's a frequent fixture at comic book conventions and G-Fest. Welcome, Keith. It's great to have you.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here. It's great to be here. I appreciate it. So yeah, I co-run. I do the stuff with 215. So great. I don't want to make it seem like it's a monarchy or anything. I definitely assist the person in charge, but I do my share of things.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. So we'll just start off with some simple, basic, obvious questions, Chris. I understand you lived in Japan for a time, and we'd like to know how that came to be and how that has influenced the path of your career.
So I was in the U.S. Navy as a cryptologist, and just ended up being a duty station that I got assigned to. And it was funny because I thought, being born and raised in San Diego, for some reason I would just go right back home, kind of just stay there, be a career guy. Instead, they sent me to Japan. It was a few years of like very cold, very snowy conditions. So I'm glad to say I will never want to go live in the snow ever again. But while there, I was really, really captivated by like how much Godzilla product there was. I'm from that generation where, we had the Shogun Warrior Godzilla, we had Hanna-Barbera show, very, few and far between products at the time. So then living there, just to completely realize that the films kept going, products there, it was kind of eye-opening for me.
This is kind of a obvious question, but can you explain what a cryptologist is? And did you crack codes? Did you see any action in a conflict? What was that all about?
Pretty much that is a code breaking type thing. It's basically, it's an arm of the intelligence community there. So,
well, let's get right into your comic book work. You can take it away, Keith.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's we have a nice list of questions here, and it's very chronological, right? So something I always like talking to people about is, like what got you into comics, mm-hmm. what's either the first comic you remember or the one that you remember kind of defining you in terms of getting some love for comics, which, eventually led you to IDW.
That's a really good question. I mean, growing up, this is the time where comics were readily available at 7-Eleven or the grocery store. I think that the first comic that I really, really got and read and reread probably was definitely, it wasn't a Godzilla comic, but it was another one of those, the Marvel licensed comics that came out at the time. It was probably honestly like G.I. Joe #1. I got it. The toys were out at the time. It was like this big kind of like combined marketing tool for everything. But really that got me into buying other stuff. And then I think the first like non-licensed comic I ever got was the first Rocket Raccoon miniseries from way back in the day. So
that's awesome. That's like a deep cut too,
I just that cover was, that Mignola cover. I think Mignola did the cover. Maybe I'm mistaken. Everyone can correct me later on. But it was just this raccoon with jetpack feet and, just shooting lasers at these like crazy robotic clowns. I was like, this looks pretty cool. Okay, I got to pick this up. So.
No, that's awesome. I think we pretty much, I think we're of a pretty similar age, if I remember right.
Yes.
And so yeah,
same birthday actually.
Same. I was gonna say brothers and birthdays too.
Yes.
So yeah, we might be the exact same age, but yeah, I just remember that era of G.I. Joe, and I think Transformers had come out right around the time I got into comics as well. So there's this formative age in comics that a lot of people are kind of at. So that's interesting. So you go from liking comics to you're at IDW, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe, there's a gap there, and maybe talk about that gap a little bit. You go from someone who likes comics to someone who's working in the comic industry.
Yeah, there's a very big gap there. So, so out of high school, went in the Navy. Out of the Navy, I'm totally going to date myself here. Managed a Blockbuster for 2 years. Said, I need to get like a steady Monday through Friday job. Worked at an insurance company. Clearly did not care for that whatsoever. So I said, I'm going to go to an art school. That's what I'm going to do with my GI Bill and all that. Just ended up being this kind of diploma mill, if you will. But on the same street as the school was this company that I saw this logo. I'm like, Midway, I know what that is. And this old video game company, growing up, going to arcades, all those things. I'm like, I wonder if they need help at all. I didn't have a computer at home. So I went in and asked if they were, looking for any interns or anything. And they said, no, we don't do internships, but we're hiring game testers. And that was one of those moments where I'm like, there's no way that's a real job. Sure enough, it was a real job. Got hired. About 2 months later, got brought into the creative services department. Did video games for almost about 12 years or so, I guess. And then just took a year off for fun employment, needed a job, answered a Craigslist ad for a graphic designer for a comic book company in San Diego. And that was it. That's how I got in. It's the most like non-dramatic story ever, but that's how I got in. Craigslist ad.
Oh, that's interesting though. So, but let's talk a little bit more about your training as an artist. I think based on your credentials, you did a whole lot of things at IDW. You probably got in the door as graphic artist, and then maybe there's some jack of all trades stuff. How often did you ply your trade on like the artistic side while you were there in the early years?
So mostly, I like to tell people like I can't draw a bath. It's just like that kind of artist is not really what I got hired for. It was more for, graphic design, like page layouts and putting together the trades, the trade paperbacks, as everyone knows, the combined issues, things like that, building ads, very, mostly lettering work though. But through that though, that's where, working in those comics or working on those comics with so many different people, you start learning more about the comics industry. So start falling in love more with like, oh wait, how did I miss like these cool Marvel series back in the day or these cool DC events? And so that's why it's really not the best answer to say like, oh, I got into this G.I. Joe #1 comic way back in the day, but through working in that industry, total appreciation for so much that's gone into it.
Yeah, but you can draw now. Well, let me rephrase. You can draw better than I can. And because I know you, I believe when we were at, I got you to sign something or do a drawing, and you have your sketch, right? I know you were like, I do one Godzilla drawing. Have you upped your repertoire a little bit, or are you still just rocking that one, and have you perfected it?
I keep doing the one, and that was, I would do signings, and everyone's like, oh, Mr. Artist, can you draw this? And I was like, you know what? What am I going to do? Write a poem for somebody? Or, so I started doing like, if I'd sign books that I had lettered, I would sign my name, then do like a word balloon for it. But then I'm like, I'm just going to try to draw this, and then did it. whoever that first person was, they loved it. So I'm like, oh, maybe this is a new thing. I'm going to keep going with it. So
Nice.
I'll try to do more though. I'll try to practice some different ones.
I remember a casual conversation we had where you were looking to up your repertoire of sketches to like a second one and perhaps a third one. So no, hey, that's one more than I can draw. I tell you that.
I think I did one Hedora for somebody before, and then maybe a Mothra. But yeah, they're terrible. But
I hear you.
As long as somebody appreciates it,
I'm sure they love them. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you're at IDW, right? You so the Godzilla fandom, right? Like maybe let's bring that into the fold a little bit here, right? Because we've talked about a lot, but Godzilla and IDW are about to intersect. So maybe a little bit more on how Godzilla affected you and when and as you kind of progressed through as a Godzilla fan.
So, growing up a fan, I saw my first movie when I was 5. Just reading all the Marvel comics, then, the Dark Horse series that came out. By this time, it was about 2005 or so, 2006, I think, when I was at IDW. And team there was like really, really small. There was like just startup. It was almost like a startup company. However, they just did 30 Days a Night. That had a lot of traction to it. So they were growing. And I think it was like my first week there. After, you learn where the coffee's at, you learn where the bathroom's at, that relaxing period. I just had a conversation with Chris Ryfle, who was their editor-in-chief at the time. I said, have you guys ever thought about doing Godzilla comics? He's like, well, do you think they'd do good? I said, yeah, no one's done them in a number of years. Like, there's definitely an audience out there. There's fans, and I was like, here's my tattoo. Like, there's fans out there. And he's like, okay, cool. Well, we're going to talk about it. I said, ooh, you need to get rights to some other monsters, though. I said, nobody's done that before. That would be the big, factor in this and its success. And sure enough, they went after it and got it. And I think it took a couple years actually for it to really materialize, but got the rights and then started with 12 other monsters too.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be the next question. So did it start with the 12 questions? No, man, you're brilliant. You're advancing it. So did it start with the 12 monsters or did it start with a number less than 12?
It started with 12. And then in the process of that, they said, well, Chris was like, well, which one should we get? And I said, well, you got to get now what we call the Fab Five, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Rodan, Mechagodzilla. I said, here's other ones. So, Gigan, Hedorah, the characters like that. And then kind of threw a couple weird ones in there like Kumonga, because for some reason I just had this, like, someone's going to do a story of Mothra trapped in this giant, spider web. And like, that would be, a creepy thing to see. But yeah, just kind of started with those 12. And that was that first series that came out. The Eric Powell, like Kingdom of Monsters series, which used those.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool. So, okay. So now you've got the monsters, right? You've got the license and I guess the obvious question there is because of, what we know about Toho, what was Toho's involvement there? Was it just here's the monsters, do whatever? Was there a style guide? Was there a Bible, things you could not do?
Mm-hmm. There were definite rules. And as far as the style guide goes, like in the licensing side of it, they were just coming out of, Sony had the licensing for a long time for the properties here for, that's where you see a lot of was it Godzilla Origins products, like the bobblehead, the little 4 bobbleheads and things like that back in the day. So that style guide was mostly just stuff for products, but for comics and like created content, there really was nothing. So Toho had a few rules for us that were like no origins, no referencing the films in a way that is like making a sequel to a particular movie or taking a scene out of it, that kind of thing. Monsters can't talk, monsters can't eat. So yeah, it's just some very basic ground rules.
Yeah, that sounds pretty minimal. You know what I mean? Like the one just caught my ears is monsters can't eat. Yeah, that's kind of so they can't eat anything. I mean, I guess is people the part that they wanted to make sure of, or like it's an interesting requirement.
Yeah, it was stated like they cannot eat. Definitely cannot eat. However, they have to do something, you know. So like,
Mhm.
but biting, like if there's a scene where, you know, a monster's like biting another one, like, okay, well that's an attack. That's not, you know, consuming the other monster.
Chris,
Okay.
I just don't want to interject. There's a quick
Mhm.
you mentioned you couldn't reference specific scenes from movies, but here I love this example. This is from Rulers of Earth.
Mhm.
This here you are cleverly finding a way to reference a scene that a fan would recognize. It's I don't know if it qualifies as a deep cut, but it's a cut where the you know Sanda and Gaida are. As a matter of fact, it's reversed in the movie. Gaida is like kind of shielding, uh, or sorry, yeah, Sanda is shielding Gaida, who's been injured. But this
Mhm.
pose that they're in seems to be a direct reference to the movie, and here it's used in a different way, where they're kind of fleeing Godzilla. I thought this was really clever. I don't know if you remember this at all, but did you find or look for ways to do kind of slip things into the comics that way that would maybe evade the Toho? You know, uh, sensors or you know surveyors.
You know, so it wasn't so much a direct, like, ooh, let's try to sneak this in. You know, but working with, you know, Matt Frank and Jeff Zorno, I'm sorry, I mispronounced his name, on that series, like they obviously would put a lot of little Easter eggs in there. Now, when I would write a script, if I had something very, 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 you know, visual that I'm thinking in my head, and I just try to put that down, you know, then we would definitely do that. But I think this was definitely, you know, Matt's knowledge of the characters and that scene in particular. They're trying to flee Godzilla. I just remember writing it as like, okay, you know, Sanda just got you know, his butt kicked. They need to escape. Godzilla, you know, they clearly are not any match for Godzilla, even teamed up. So, um, yeah, like some of those. That's kind of the fun thing about writing comics is that, you know, you do so much, but then you want to leave so much to the artist to do as well. You know, everybody should really give their um, 2 cents, their input, I guess you could say.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, actually to talk about the creative process a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so you're kind of hinting at what your scripts looked like. It sounds
Mm-hmm.
like that you were keeping it pretty minimal, right, with as much opportunity for Matt and Jeff to
Mm-hmm.
do what they wanted with it. So, where, you know, is that like when we talk about your panel direction, things like, did you have panel direction? I guess. Um, let me go with a couple. Did you have panel direction, um, or did you just say, you know, like, so something I used to do in back in volume 1 of Kadoja, once I got comfortable with Rory, I would just tell him, Rory Smith, I would tell him, so these 4 pages, this fight's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Here's all the dialogue. Do what you want. Right. Like that kind of thing. So, you know, kind of where on the spectrum was it? Also, did it change from Matt to Jeff, or was it the same for both artists?
It was, you know, I would say pretty much it was the same for both artists. If there was something very in particular that I wanted to see, though, I would spell that out in the script. So if it was like panel 4 and we're going to do this big reveal on the next page, it would be something like, okay, this character needs to be on the left-hand side because, you know, he's going to get hit by Godzilla's heat ray on the next page, you know, those sort of things.
Okay. No, that's interesting. So, in terms of the Godzilla appearance itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, you know, you kind of cut your teeth comic wise, if I remember right, on Marvel's Godzilla,
Yes.
which is a very interesting visual take on Godzilla itself, right? So where did you want to be in terms of IDW? I mean, they're, you know, in a lot of cases, I think it's a rather authentic Godzilla, you know, but kind of where were you there? You know, what was your vision for Godzilla in terms of the comic itself? How did you feel it differed? That kind of stuff.
You know, I think it's really just up to the artists, whoever's working on the books at the time. I remember with Kingdom of Monsters, there was some very not specific or strict. I shouldn't say. There was direction given from Toho to keep it more like Heisei style, or, you know, something that was more common and commonly known at the time. Definitely no like Showa looks, but, you know, pinups or something, or just like a cover, that would be fine. But for the consistency of the books, keeping it probably Heisei was like the easiest. But for as far as like the Rulers series, I mean, I think we all talked. I think Matt came up with one design that was kind of like a kind of a hybrid between the Millennium design and a little bit of the Heisei design. Jeff, I think, tweaked a little bit on it, and that's what we went with. There really wasn't too much, focus given on that as much as, okay, how are we going to start bringing in these monsters and, really like keeping the series going, because at that time there was a lot of, everybody was really focused on sales, and the sales were good, but it was only scheduled to be like a 5-issue miniseries to start with. And then they said, okay, you can go to 8. But every time they did that, it's like I would have to then rearrange the scripts and figure out like, okay, what are we going to do with this one? Like, how do we continue this? I think that's why in issue 2, there's an RI cover that Jeff did that has like Gigan at Area 51. And originally that was going to be part of like, Gigan's big reveal. Like he breaks out of, the Grand Canyon, goes back there, because there was like a tie into that, he somehow was tied to that. But then later on, we just end up using Orga as being that like UFO kind of, alien Area 51 sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's actually something, and I remember that. I remember as Rulers of Earth was coming out, how there was this, this focus on sales, as you put it, and also, but what's interesting is when I go back and I read the whole thing, it's very cohesive. It's very thoughtfully planned. You don't see the seams, and there are some television shows, there are some movies, right, that have existed where there's a first one and it's successful, and then there becomes a second, third, however many, 40th, whatever, or television series get extended, and you definitely start to get into this, ooh, they're just buying time now because they're not sure what they're doing, so
right.
So to your point, it sounds like you're kind of touching on that, but once you got past the first couple issues, it sounds like you put some germs in there, right, that you could just develop as the series kind of continued and rolled on into more issues. Did I get that right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, the backbone of it really was this series of like pitches that I had given to Chris Ryall when we were going after the license with Toho. I said, like, I don't know, what if there's some kind of like not Seatopia, uprising from these like, ocean dwelling creatures who use Titanosaurus for some reason, and looking at that, I was like, okay, well, we could take all these different elements and put them together. So when the series was, okay, you can get 3 more issues, like, okay, well, that's kind of like a mini series on its own. So let's, bring in this. And I think at the end, it just really ended up working out pretty well. It's your definite, 70s, 80s comic freak of the week type book, but matching everything and trying to, do new things. Having like that issue 12 stop with like, oh, did Godzilla die? It's like, of course not, but then having it come back like issue 13 with a little bit of a break between, closing out the C chapter, bringing in like the more space elements.
No, it is. It's interesting to read back, because again, I don't remember the seams when I read it back. I don't remember those breaks in continuity, which is good writing, right? So the monsters, right? I think at some point, I mean, my math may be off a little bit, but seems like a lot more than 12 monsters in Rulers of Earth.
Yes.
So at some point the license got expanded, right? So what was that like? When did that happen? Was it just Rulers of Earth, etc.? When did you get the chance to expand the license?
So I'm trying to remember like when the exact date was, but when we did that first Kingdom of Monsters book, there was this idea that I always had as like, God, I would love to, if I ever had the rights, like dreaming if I ever had my own comic company, if we ever had the rights, I wonder if there would be a really cool thing to get like retailers involved. So I talked to the head of marketing at IDW, Dirk Wood, at the time, and said, here's this idea. He goes, oh, that's pretty cool. So basically what the idea was, like, retailers could send in a picture of their store. We would have a template drawn, which Matt drew that template. And then retailer orders a certain amount of copies and your store is about to get smashed by Godzilla. So like you have your own exclusive. That ended up being like the best selling title that IDW did up until My Little Pony came out. But it was a cool idea. I think Marvel was inspired by it, I guess, and did a, Spider-Man can save your store kind of thing promotion shortly after that. So it's pretty flattering. But I think that really got the comics like known. And so people were picking up the comics. And it got to a point where IDW management, said like, wow, this is cool. We should really, extend this Toho license. I said, but if you do that, we should get the rights to the other monsters too.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, we asked, and it was, I forget the finances behind it, but we were able to do that. So that was really exciting because like for the first time, you're going to start seeing characters that have never been, first off, all these monsters hadn't been in an American comic before.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to count the Megalon tie-in comic for that movie with Robot Man and was it Barodon or something like that? I think it was Geigen's name.
Borodan, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So it was a really cool thing to be a part of. And then like, okay, well now what do we do with all these monsters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is it's interesting, to get behind it there. So the graphic novels versus movies, right? Mm-hmm. Like something I think about a lot. I write comics. I fancy a novel in my future. I think Steve can kind of relate to this with the books he writes as well, and movies, etc. Like every format offers something unique, right? Mm-hmm. And so in terms of graphic novels versus movies, what were you most excited about there, where a graphic novel might give you an opportunity to do something that no other format could?
Really, I think it's, as a writer, and I'm sure you both agree, like you don't have a budget, like your imagination is unlimited at that point. So for me, it was like, how do we get some really big, like this would look really cool as a movie. Yeah, but it's not ever going to happen. So like, let's make it as big and grandiose as possible, and, go to different locations and, all kinds of like big, crazy, things happening. But I mean, I still think if you look at like the comic medium compared to film, there's absolutely great films out there. One of my favorites, Jaws, obviously way better, in my opinion, than the novel. But sometimes, when it comes to comics, graphic novels are often, I think, better than their film counterparts.
Yeah, that
so
makes
sense. I don't know what it is. If it's just like you get that, when you're reading, you're building these voices in your head, and you're kind of contributing to the story that you're part of something you weren't originally part of, I guess, is a different way to say it.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. I mean, that's my answer when people when people ask me, or when I talk about that kind of thing, right? The unlimited budget is the best, So yeah. There's no, I mean, and there are some scenes, like we could go through Rulers of Earth right now and be like that. This page probably costs $40 million. You ever want to see this in a movie? That's a $40 million page right there. I
was gonna say budgets are unlimited, but page count is not. So you still have that comic budget you got to work in.
That's right. Okay, so moving away a little bit from Rulers of Earth, from Rulers of Earth to Rage Across Time, right? So you had I think kind of supervisory role there in terms of selecting art teams, building it, and also writing an issue yourself. So, in terms of selecting teams, how was that process?
So for that really was, it's a good question because I forgot to touch on that earlier. The creative consultant role was definitely like an unpaid sort of thing. It was just, I was that guy in-house who had that first line of knowledge about this brand. So before we do something really stupid and send a pitch to Toho that we knew would get rejected, it was Chris, how's this look? And I say, I don't know. I think we should change that. I don't think that would fly. But as far as like the choosing the teams, that really is up to the editorial team. And in that case, it was Bobby Curnow. He was on from, I think his first assignment with Godzilla was doing all of those covers I was talking about for that first retailer exclusive. I mean, and it was 100 different covers. So he was very busy. He got thrown, head first into the world of Godzilla. But he would pick those teams. And then for something like Rage Across Time, it was, okay, here's the history that we've had, IDW's had with the brand. So we'd pitch these new ideas to Toho, but still following those rules of like, okay, nothing's changing, nothing's being altered. Can we do this? And that was actually a really, really fun series to work on.
Yeah, and so I have two two things that I wanted to talk about specifically from your perspective. I forgot to mention earlier, actually, that you know, something that I actually read a couple lines of this to my kid the other day because I had my graphic novel of Rulers of Earth #1, collected volume 1, right? And I just got to a thing and I'm like, man, that is, like, write what you know, right? The military writing. Like there, you just have a couple of these exchanges where I'm like, man, that is flexing your military writing ability. Like, did you enjoy that, or was it like, was it one of these things of like, wow, like I get to, I mean, the thing about giant monsters is it's really hard to tell a giant monster story without involving the military somehow, right? Because if you do that, you're just making such a conscious decision to kind of thumb your nose at the military or just ignore that entire part of the story. And in many cases, the biggest conflict, and at least the primary conflict, the first one, whatever you want to say, with a giant monster is always when we throw our military at it. It's kind of critical. So yeah, I mean, was that like, did you kind of cackle with delight when you got to rope in some of that stuff, or was it just another day at the office to you?
No, it was fun to do some of those things. I mean, I really have to thank Larry Hama for all of that, like, military stuff, growing up reading his work on Joe. But it was a matter of, like, we had brought in a character, Steve Woods from Kingdom of Monsters. This was sort of like it was shaping up to be the third kind of ongoing series that IDW had done. So it was like, okay, this is going to be that last, chapter of this, massive ongoing story. Let's bring in some characters from before. So Stephen Woods' character, he piloted Mechagodzilla, like, in that Kingdom of Monsters. So, like, of course, he'd be qualified for this new, counter kaiju resistance, the Seeker, group. So having him brought in, like, he definitely had a story to tell, and he was a part of. There's the military, and then there's the the science part with the kaiju research group, Lucy's team. So it's kind of like one side is with them, one side's against them, but in the process of things, like, they have to work together, like, as we all do in any kind of situation, work together to get through it. But there was, like, fun things I put in there that I don't know if really people picked up on, but just things like there was a fight, like, during the daytime, and making a comment about, like, well, hey, at least there's light. Have you ever tried to fight in a blacked out city at nighttime with these things? Like, how would what would the military do in that regard? Like, we watch these movies, and it's like, okay, you think about that stuff almost like the same way you don't think about, I guess, unfortunately, 9/11 made a lot of people think about it, but, like, there might be people in these buildings that these monsters are smashing through. And there is I think there's a human element in these films that, sometimes it gets touched on and sometimes doesn't.
No, yeah, that's another thing I think of a lot when I'm writing the kaiju stuff too. You know what I mean? Like, it's it's just the scale problem. That's what I call it, right? That you have this vast difference in scale, and to work both of those scales into a story can sometimes be challenging. So,
like, if you're trying to run away from a monster, it's like, I was telling Steve earlier, like, I had the LA Marathon going on, like, outside all morning. It's like, if they're fighting you, like, you better run pretty quick. I mean, you have to cover blocks, to get away from something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So your story in Rage Across Time, right? The ancient Greece story. Something I found interesting about that was that the other ones feel like they're told from a personal perspective, right? Where you went with the angle of the gods, right? So, like, what led to that? It was a really interesting choice to make it from the perspective of the gods instead of kind of your usual personal perspective that we get for so many of these kaiju stories.
So on that, I actually had a really, really good co-writer in that, Khalil Schweitzer. He worked in marketing at IDW. We were just shooting it one day, and I said, we should send in a pitch for this. And, he said, well, what do you think would be good? And somehow we came up with the Greek gods. I said, I had this, kept having this image in my head of, I'm going to forget the issue number, but the famous X-Men one, Wolverine's just getting blasted by that Sentinel. I'm like, that's Godzilla fighting like a human, like, what humans could do this? And so we came up with this idea for, having the Greek gods in there, but really, like, changing it into, like, well, what made the gods powerful? And, Khalil had this idea of like, well, what if it was like this fear? Like they're just up there, like just BSing, like really not to get into the specifics of like, is there really an Olympus and, all that, like, what if they did exist at the time? Humans worship them, they're getting their power because, these humans are like, wow, we can't mess with them. But what if something happened? What if something entered their world that really challenged them and really took them down a notch, and sort of like basically saying, Godzilla is the reason there are no more, like deities like this. And that power was tested. Those gods failed. And just kind of like the ending. We were just like, okay, well, let's throw that in there. Let poor Zeus, let him wander the earth. But then he ends up at like the worst place possible to retire. And tell
nice
story.
Touch. Yeah, and then there he is, frozen at the end. So neat, a neat touch there. So stories, right? Like where they come from. It's always a challenge to think of something maybe not new, because there's nothing new under the sun, but something that has your own spin on it and that you feel like you want to tell. So how do you explore that? In terms of where we feel like there's a billion stories out there and a billion more that somebody's writing. How do you kind of explore what stories you want to tell in that on this world where there's so many of them?
I really think, that's a great question because I don't have an immediate answer for it. I think for me, it's mostly been, what is a situation or what is something like I really want to try to tell, and how can I, get that point across? I'm a big supporter of like ocean conservation. So with Godzilla as a property, and like, as we all know, like this character has been around for close to 70 years now. There's always been these themes, and Earth, the love of Earth, sustainability, those are all themes that have really carried through. So with Godzilla, it was a matter of like, okay, well, what story can I tell and just constantly just bash humans in it? Like what do we keep doing wrong? And in the case of Rage Across Time, it's like, is it our hubris that ruins us? Rulers of Earth, it was, the pollution brought up this undersea, group called the Devonians, but they had monsters. It's like the whole time, like we either have Godzilla as our protector, or, Godzilla is our punishment for what we're doing.
Oh, makes sense. So that is all I had for the comic portion. So Steve, you want to take it away and move to Toho? There we go.
Yeah. Well, we do want to ask you about your role that you've now been in for approximately how many years? A couple of years now, right? With Toho?
It's going on 3 actually now. Yeah. Wow,
so,
it's flown by.
Wow. So I would think that a lot of folks out there who are fans of this genre would assume that this is some dream job. But tell us about what you do there, what your role is, and what sort of projects you work on, and how it's going.
Yeah. So I was asked about, I was a contractor for about a good year, but almost 3 years ago, I was asked if I wanted to come on board and help them start this new division called Toho International, basically handling all the licensing and sales of, building the Godzilla brand, if you will, outside of Japan. Immediately jumped at that chance, moved up to LA, and here we are. But what our division in LA does is pretty much work with all of the licensees, all these new products that you see, just product development, brand development, marketing, social media. That's why so many of them, like you'll see like our social media accounts, they're constantly growing, but compared to some fan accounts, it looks like we're very behind, so it's a slow startup for the company, but it's definitely like a global focus. So right now, we just coming out of the pandemic was, kind of like anybody else did, caused a pretty big hiccup with things. So, but like, GVK came out, Singular Point finally came out. So we're just finally starting to get on a roll, and just had our first Godzilla Day ever.
That's right.
In the US. So
now Toho International has existed as an entity with an office in Los Angeles dating back to the 1950s. But it and originally they had worked on basically selling the foreign rights to their films in the West, and they worked to bring Broadway productions to Japan. But it sounds to me like you're saying the focus has changed considerably given the realities of today.
Mhm.
Is this a new entity that you're working for? A new like, has the company been rebranded, relaunched, or is it just shifting its focus?
I think it's pretty much just shifting its focus, and there's reasons why it's called international.
Yes.
That I can't get into, but it's just like you said. They did stage production, so there's there's Toho Music, there's Toho Games, there's Toho Stage. It's another offshoot of the company that is focused solely on building the business of Godzilla and other IP.
Mhm. So, and just to be absolutely clear, there's only one office in the United States right now, right? It's yours, is that correct? Is there still a
Yes.
New York office?
From what I hear, there is, but it's not technically an office. It's more of a we're all working at home kind of thing, like one of those. There's really like two people there.
Okay, but explain what Toho International is not, because I think that people still assume that the U.S. side is somehow involved in the feature film production that goes on in Japan to one extent or another, but that's really not the case, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, we're not involved in the film production at all, or any of the productions really of content creation.
Mhm.
We are doing new content as far as like things for YouTube. Um, I'm sorry. If I keep looking off the side, I tried to pigeon-proof my balcony yesterday, and somehow one got in, and he's trapped and flying around out there.
Oh,
I will take care of that after this, though, in a
yeah.
very humane way too.
Okay.
I'll add. But yeah, so we are doing new content for YouTube. Surprisingly, the team in Japan was really inspired by seeing my dog and I like talk through one of our meetings. So we're producing this show called Godzilla Chomp,
Mhm.
which premieres on Wednesday on our YouTube channel, and it's basically like a Godzilla 101 for somebody like my mom, who she's known me all my life, but she never really understood what Godzilla is. So it's a buffer to say, okay, let's learn about Godzilla. Let's learn about, what Toho's doing in LA, what Toho's done. My dog pops up with some random facts. But there's enough in there for hardcore fans. You get a look inside the office. You get a look inside, the storage area that we have with some really, really cool things that have never been seen before, like old vintage one sheets, press kits, things like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, it'll be pretty fun. And I think it's that first step that Toho's doing to try to branch out to reach a wider audience, and to really just let people know and let fans know that they support them as well.
Does Toho International, does your office have any involvement or relationship with uh, the legendary pictures projects that have, you know, that have been made in the past, and I think some people would hope that will continue? What's your relationship to that franchise?
So we mostly work with them on the licensed products, and different promotional things that they're doing around those projects. Like all of the big decisions are handled through Japan, whether that's new content or ideas for content. If there's ever any kind of like really crazy idea that somebody wants to do involving the monster verse, if you will, then
Mhm.
we will reach out to Japan for guidance on that. But for the most part, it's if someone said, hey, here's a book, we can review the book and say, yeah, that's approved.
But there's no doubt that being in the position that you're in, you at least have some sort of, I don't know, intel. You have intel as to what's going on when those films are in production, and what the real story is, and because inevitably, like for instance, when Godzilla versus Kong was delayed a couple of times, and then of course the pandemic pushed it back, but there were kind of rumors flying around, but it's not really your place to intervene in that in any way, really, is it?
No, yeah,
Yeah.
correct. Like not
Okay.
at all. Like for working in intelligence back then in the Navy, you get really used to just deflecting, I guess you could say.
So you mentioned that on Wednesday, Godzilla's birthday. We had Godzilla Day,
Hmm.
and there was a big event here in Los Angeles at the Draft House, where a lot of your vendors came together, your licensees, to talk about, I guess, future plans and hear what the company had to say. Is that something that you're going to continue doing on a regular basis now? Is this something indicative of a a strategic plan to, you know, expand the marketing of this franchise and this character in ways that we haven't seen before?
We certainly hope so.
Okay.
You know, I think the reaction to a lot of things, you know, we had a lot of licensees that did, you know, specific drops of product on Godzilla Day as well, which turned out really well. You know, Super 7, Mondo, for example. So building Godzilla Day as a branded celebration of the character, we think like went over really well. Now, as far as like having a licensee summit, that a lot of that was due to the fact that, you know, we didn't have any of the big licensing shows this year, like, you know, licensing expo. I think brand licensing expo in Europe is happening still, but usually there's a annual show in Vegas where everybody gets together, all those, you know, different licensees, and they talk about new products, talk about what's coming up. You know, we give updates to them as far as like, here's directions that we want to take next year. One specific thing that I was really trying to drive home was, you know, the character anniversaries. You know, Hedorah's anniversary and Mothra's anniversary this last year, 50th and 60th, respectively. But, you know, Gigan's anniversary is next year, 50th. You got, you know, Megalon and Jet Jaguar in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, of course, Godzilla, you know, being 70 in 2024, Mecha Godzilla being 50. So really just trying to work with licensees to focus on some things like that and say, you know, let's give good products to the fans. Let's also, you know, do some really fun new things. Like, you don't have to take this style guide that has like movie posters and just put it on a coffee mug or a t-shirt, you know,
Yeah.
try to do some fun, innovative things with it.
I noticed that you referred to at this event, which thankfully, I was privileged to be part of. A little.
Thank you very much for
in a
introducing.
small way.
Oh,
Sure.
that was really cool.
But it was, you know, when you were rolling out this calendar, 2022 was referred to as the year of Gigan, which I thought was kind of interesting. But the one thing also that came out of that, I hope I'm not revealing anything that's a secret. I don't think I am. Is you kind of referred to certain monsters as the big five, and then you had kind of like I don't know if a second tier is the right way to put it, but there was like a big five and then a greater 10. Can you talk about that at all? Because I thought that was pretty interesting in the way it indicates the way the company looks at the characters and the opportunities for them.
Well, I think, you know, one of the weaknesses that I think the brand has always had, but the fans know, are that, you know, there's these extra characters out there and they're super recognizable. Everyone knows who they are. But since the monsters can't talk, they're not really like those characters that you would see in another property.
Okay.
You know, everyone talks about, you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You know, Toho and Universal were doing the same thing, like back when they first started doing all their films, you know, including these extra monsters and making a bigger deal out of it. So with these characters, we have what we call the Fab Five: Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Mecha Godzilla. Well-known characters. But there's another five, and then kind of six if you count, you know, one of them, 6.5 or 5.5, being like Biollante, Jet Jaguar, Gigan, Hedorah, Minita, and there's one more I'm forgetting probably, but those characters, they all kind of have like these characteristics to them as well. So when it comes to trying to attract new fans or even creating content or new products, you know, sometimes you have to think of these characters like, you know, Mina's brave and like adolescent at the same time. Jet Jaguar is kind of very superhero like. Gigan just really cold, calculating. You know, Hedorah, you know, obviously like toxic and just gross. You know, so I think there's characteristics and attributes you can assign to these characters, which is what we do want to try to explore with them.
Well, it's been a really interesting talk with you, Chris, and getting some insight into your writing process and the way the whole, you know, planning process went into the comics that you've worked on and all the
Angerous. I just read in the
Angerous.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin Casper.
Are we not allowed to say Angulas anymore? I don't know.
You know what? I was told they can never say okay, and then all of a sudden there's a T-shirt at the Godzilla store with Angerous saying that, and I was like, okay.
Well, and then, you know, getting some insight into your role at Toho, which is really fascinating. So tell us where Godzilla Chomp will premiere, so people will know where to go find it.
So that will be on the official Godzilla YouTube channel for North America and the UK that we have. It is it's actually global except Japan. There's some things that we do have to geo-block from them, and likewise, if anybody watched the Godzilla Fest Tuesday morning, I guess you could say, there was a period of time where we took a break, and that had something to do with that kind of arrangement. But it is just youtube.com/Godzilla Toho, and that is our official one. Currently, right now, we have like the Hanna-Barbera series on there, subtitle episodes of Godzilla, Chibi Godzilla, all the Japanese trailers. Like there'll be new content coming out for there for sure. It's something we're proud of and we're trying to build up. But yeah, Chomp will be on there on Wednesday, which is ironically the Toho anniversary. So we have the day off. So I can't wait for that. Finally.
Well, not to put you on the spot, but is there anything you can either announce or tease or any future development that you might be able to let people know about?
So we had some really good announcements come out from the licensee summit. Finally working with some really cool, collaborations with different companies, such as Cup Noodle. That's going to be a lot of fun. Hot Wheels is one of my favorites. But there's one that we didn't announce that you'll be hearing about pretty soon, and it's all has something to do with what we've been talking about. The whole theme of this, I definitely could say it's comic related, but it is something very, very exciting. And 2022 is going to be a pretty cool year. Okay,
and as we close out, I want to just take a moment to let our audience know where both of you. Where your work is available. So Chris, let's start with you. Where can people find your books and any other things that you want to plug at this time?
First off, thanks for that. Mostly on Amazon. It's the easiest way to get them. But IDW is reissuing a lot of the old collections in brand new, like deluxe editions. So they're any local comic shop or bookstore. They should have those in stock as well.
All right. And Keith, tell us about Kodoja and where people can find it.
Sure. So quickly, Kodoja is a black and white throwback comic. It is basically 1950s era Godzilla meets H.P. Lovecraft. So giant monsters in a Lovecraft vein. Kodoja itself is a 200-foot tall biodroid. So kind of like a Shogun Warrior inside a DNA exoskin. And we're up to 3 volumes, so collecting 14 issues. The first issue of volume 4 is probably going to be out in a month or two, so hopefully. And if people are interested, then I have a website. It's keithrfoster.com. It's just my name. So you can there's a Kodoja web store and some places where you can check out the books. And if you want to follow along, we're pretty active on Instagram, and it's just one word. It's Kodoja Kaiju, all one word on Instagram.
All right. Well, thank you both. It's been a wonderful chat. Just a bit of housekeeping. Kaiju Masterclass continues all day today with a lot of interesting programming. Up next, we have an interview with Tiffany Grant, who's a voice actress who's dubbed a lot of films in this genre and has done many, many, many other roles. We have interviews today with Jasper Sharp, who's a film critic and historian, Craig Allen, who's another dubbing artist, and Ryuhei Kitamura, Reijiro Kuroku. There's a lot of great stuff. So please check out our KaijuMasterclass.com is our website. You can check out the schedule tab. There's also a link on the homepage. The watch link will take you directly to our YouTube channel where all the programming is taking place. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Right. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. We'll see you again soon.